Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about Git. So let's get into it. So the question in question was a bit of a story. So I had a person reach out stating that in his current company, he is not using Git for version control. He's working at a small startup with just a few people, and the way that they actually share code amongst each other is through Dropbox, I believe, and he sees this as an issue and he wants to help the company transition into using something like Git for version control, but he is wondering how to do this because he said that they are hesitant, they're not really open to this. So this, I will admit, is probably it's not the first time I've ever heard of anybody who isn't using something that most of the industry considers a standard tool. So tools such as Subversion or Git or Mercurial or some type of versioning system is usually the norm. But this is an example of one of those cases where someone has, and this is what I've been saying to a few of you, someone is using a niched way of working that isn't in line with what most of the industry is doing. So it's very interesting that he, I believe that he stated that this is his first job, has identified this as a problem and wants to push for new and better things. Now, I will say that changing people's minds when they're a little bit reluctant to do something is a lot of work, usually. And it's usually the sort of task that is reserved for tech leads or team leads or some person like that. Mostly because it's much easier for such an individual to know how to have the charisma and the knowledge of the industry, and not just the industry, I would say even people, to move people in a direction to get them to try something out. It's a lot easier to do this if you have a bit of seniority, but the steps are the same as what I'm going to tell you. So the first and foremost thing that you need to do is to identify the value proposition that you are about to make. This is the easy part. In other words, you need to figure out what is actually going to be improved with moving to Git in this scenario. And this is true for any tooling, any change you want to make ever. What is the benefit? You need to be very clear about that. The second part of it, which is much harder for quite a lot of people, is to identify the cost of moving from one thing to another, because change is never free. And this is where quite a lot of people fail. They get stuck in the positive aspects and all the benefits that they're going to reap, and then they convince themselves that this is going to just be amazing across the board, and then they don't account for the transition period. And the transition period is very rarely just perfect. It's very rare that you just have everything work on day one and everybody's super happy about something and like they just kind of get on board. So you need to think about what the problems are going to be. So short term, usually what happens when you make a change to somebody's workflow is that the people who are involved, their workflow is going to get disrupted. So you're going to see lower productivity, you're going to see people struggle with like doing certain things, and there's going to be frustration and problems and so forth. You need to account for this, and you need to have a plan for how to deal with this transition period and this frustration. Now, in the scenario of Git, usually the way to do this is to have a cheat sheet of some sort and have education materials. This doesn't just apply to Git. I mean, it's true for any tool. Like the first part of moving someone from one workflow to another is to just figure out what is the least amount of work that I have to do in order to get that change in place. And with Git as an example now, that usually means the basic commands like pushing, pulling, committing, merging, things of this nature, and then a basic workflow. And if you can get that just to collect the learning materials that you need in order to do this and to answer all the questions, and ideally a cheat sheet or something like that with a few commands that kind of cover all of this, that's a very good first step. Because when people are learning something new, they are going to look things up quite often, and the less amount of time they have to spend on searching for information to their searching for answers to their question, the better for you, or rather the better for them. They're going to feel less frustrated about the situation. They are very likely to feel some frustration, but it's going to be less. Another factor that you need to consider when you're doing this is that you need to think about what happens when something goes wrong, because things are going to go wrong in the beginning of things. People are unused to something and they don't really, especially with a tool such as with Git, where it is a fairly complex tool for someone who is just starting to use it. So what will help quite a lot is if you have a reset button on whatever it is that you are doing, so that people can go from being in this mess where they did something wrong back to a known state where they feel secure that their work is still intact and still safe. Now in Git, commands such as merge abort, revert, reset, things like this, these are things that you should definitely add into your learning materials and to make sure that you are educating your coworkers in. And then apart from that, you also have to make a personal change to yourself, and that is you need to change your mindset about this, or maybe you already have this mindset. The mindset that you are going for is that you are directly responsible for delivering on this ambition of yours. You are the expert. You are the go-to person for this. You're the one who's going to have to work twice as hard to learn all the commands and have answers to all the questions for your coworkers. You take full ownership of making this workflow work. That is what's going to be required, and the reason why this is so important is because because your coworkers are going to come to you. If they don't know anybody else, they are going to go and look at the person who suggested this workflow in the first place. And if they find that they have problems, like if something isn't working or something isn't really going their way, they're going to try to go back to the old way of working. They're going to try to figure out a way to not use this new workflow. If they can, they will, as I said, they will just avoid using your new workflow. If they can't, if you lock them down so that they can't actually do anything besides using the new workflow, then they're going to get angry, and they're going to get quite a lot of them, they get really frustrated, and then they're going to want to talk to somebody and get help and stuff like that, and then you need to be able to help them, because if you block them completely, the anger is just going to rise, and they're going to be unable to produce the work that they are trying to produce, right? So if you do all of these things, the last part is to make the pitch, basically. And what this basically means is that you're going to most likely have, as this person was saying, they're going to be hesitant and they're not going to want to try it. But you don't have to make them love the idea. You don't have to get them excited necessarily about this. All you need to do is to get them to say yes to this question. Could we just try this out for a few weeks and see how it goes? If you can make that value proposition, because all of this work that you're doing right now is to just make them comfortable with saying yes to this specific question. If you can get them to just try it, you have created the situation that you're after. You have switched over, you have redirected everybody into a new workflow, and now they're going to go down that path. It's kind of like switching rails for a train. You're just forking them off in a new direction. And that's all you need, because once they get invested into this workflow, even if it's just for a few weeks, it is unlikely that someone who has adjusted to this workflow is going to want to go back to the previous workflow, because that is also an adjustment. And as I said, you can pretty much bet on that most people don't like change. They don't want to change something, even if they used to do something and they have a new way of doing things and then they set things up. Undoing the thing that they've just done in order to go back is only going to be attractive if they really, really hate the new way of working. So over time, you will see that most people will start out being frustrated or like not liking the thing that you just did. Some people will be positive, of course, but quite a lot of people will be not that happy. Those are the people that you need to address, and over time this will just become another workflow to them, and some will actually even be positively surprised that this was such an improvement. But yeah, so what I want you to take away from this is that the process of convincing somebody, such as a team that doesn't use Git, to start using Git, is basically down to creating a value proposition, identifying the risks with such a switch, and then putting in place learning materials, sheets, and reading up yourself and so forth, to the point where you feel comfortable making sure that you can make this a very painless process for all the naysayers. Then making a value proposition where you just ask them to try it out for a little while, because trying is not committing. Don't try to force them to say, we're going to do this now. Just say, can we just try it? Because it is the same thing. It's just that it feels less overwhelming or less threatening for the people, or less risky, if you will, even if it's just a mental game, because it is the same thing. It is literally the same thing. And that's the key thing here. In order to convince people who are reluctant to try a new workflow, you actually have to know them better than they know themselves in order to get them to start moving in the direction you want them to move. So hopefully you found this useful. Have a great day.